said, if God loves what God creates and would save all, no exceptions. Okay, so that's our historical response to that question. I think it would be interesting for you to sit at a table with some of the people from my church and talk to them about what they understand as paradise. We tend to say, and I tend to say that I am agnostic on the notion of paradise. That I believe the most important thing that I know is this world, and that I can make a difference in this world, and whether or not there is a paradise is not up to me, and it's also not something that drives my actions. My actions are to make paradise on the earth in this time as best as I can. Co-creating with God, in my theology, co-creating with God, opportunities for paradise to exist for this world. Does that help? So Jesus, to us, as one prophet in a line of many prophets, can be a model to help people do that, but isn't the one and only model. So we do celebrate Christmas and Easter and these things, but our ancestors have always focused on the teachings of Jesus and not things like miracles and the resurrection or any of that. We would say, for the most part, that's not part of what we understand as important about Jesus. And this difference goes all the way back to some of the history I talked about, which created a lot of problems for a lot of people. Because as soon as the Christian church said Jesus is this, and he was God's son, and et cetera, anyone outside of that was in trouble. And those are some of our ancestors that stood outside of that. Does that help? Good question. Other questions? Yes.
Forgive my ignorance, but I was just wondering, what other Christian sects that are close to you guys that, doesn't believe in Trinity, but still they wouldn't be called Unitarian? Are there any, or
I don't know of any. Yeah, I mean, we had at times some what was called the Radical Reformation. When the Reformation happened in Europe in the 16th century and the Protestant church was formed, we were sort of far left side of the Radical Reformation. And our partners at that time were the ancestors to the Baptists now, but they weren't arguing for a non-Trinitarian perspective. They were arguing for reason, that one must reason one's way into religion, not just be born into it. So I don't know of any non-Trinitarian ancestors or cohorts, especially now, I would say. We occupy a unique niche in that history. It's a good question. I didn't think about that.
Okay, question.
Yeah.
In the early church, the issue of Trinitarianism and Unitarianism didn't exist.
Right. Before the creed was developed in Nicaea, there was that variation.
Yeah, St. Paul didn't talk about it.
Right. And going back to the early church, what we know of is that there was a lot of variation in theological perspectives. That's why Arius is so important, because he sort of crystallizes that argument at that council at a time when the emperor of the largest kingdom in the Western world was trying to unify Christianity with the empire for various reasons, and he couldn't, as a ruler, he couldn't say, go ahead, have 12 different kinds of churches. That's just not how you unify a government, state religion.
unity to form it.
Mhm.
So they developed a dogma.
Exactly.
They had to. It was quasi-political.
It was absolutely political.
Yeah, it's much more than quasi.
Yep. And that's in part why this history is, to me anyway, is interesting, because there were people who stood outside of that conformity and said, no, we believe in variation. Just like the Ottomans said, we believe in the peaceful coexistence of Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Our ancestors were saying, we believe in the peaceful coexistence of different kinds of Christians. And ours were the kind that said Jesus was close to God, but not of God.
That was the traditional attitude before Nicaea.
What was the traditional attitude?
That was a traditional attitude, was it?
Yes.
It was sort
As
of
far,
a-
yeah. Yes. Yes.
How does the ministry work in your church? And another thing that I'm wondering is, do you make any research or studies to bring the ancestors of your faith and next generation? I mean, how will next generation will know Unitarianism? With the history or with your teachings?
Mm-hmm. As opposed to?
We like your teachings tonight, and
Yeah.
very nice.
Yeah, I think one of the problems with teaching our history is this. As many of you know who've studied history, the people who win battles write the history.
Yeah.
And our religious ancestors are clearly the ones that lost battles.
Mhm.
And so a lot of our history is pieced together by reading texts of the detractors of our people. So in other words, what we know about Arius is what was written about him by Athanasius, who may very well have poisoned Arius. He was dismissing Arius as a fool, but while he was doing that, he was writing out all of what Arius believed, which is kind of how we've pieced together a lot of our history. So that's an interesting side of that. I think we've turned a corner since Transylvania, because in Transylvania the churches developed as fully functioning Unitarian churches. If we go to Transylvania right now, we will sit in a room with people that probably look a lot more like you folks from Turkey than some of us, and they are Unitarians whose ancestors have been running churches for 500 years. So we started to not lose every battle when we got that Edict of Toleration. And so we know more about our history. So one of the ways we pass on our sense of theology and history is to teach our children. We also see our tradition as a living tradition. So our tradition adapts and changes throughout time, but keeps some of these core notions. Does that answer your question or not? Maybe somebody else can answer it also. I don't have to be the only.
Could you mention the principles?
The purposes and
pillars.
principles?
No. The Unitarian
Oh,
principles.
Yeah, I don't study the principles. The interesting thing is, I think the interesting thing about this is that we have a theology and we have a history, and I think the history says we've always believed at some level that God is one, unity, but mysterious. That salvation is the practice of justice and searching for the truth. And that our call in the world is to embrace people of all faiths and all backgrounds and all variations of human life without exception. These are our core, that's our Trinity really. We've written principles and purposes for our organization in America, which state things like we believe in